What if the blood moving through your body right now carries a message written before the first human being ever took a breath? And what if that message has been sitting quietly inside your cells for thousands of years, waiting for someone to finally read it out loud? Before we open it together, do me one small favor. Hit the like button so this story can reach the people who need to hear it most. Subscribe while you're here, because every week I dig up stories hiding in plain sight. And when this video ends, share it with one person whose family story you think was lost forever. Trust me, by the last minute, you'll know exactly why. Here's where the mystery begins. Every time you've seen a blood test, you've seen the letter O. It sits on hospital wristbands, on lab forms, on donor cards. Most people glance at it and see almost nothing. A single letter. A box checked. But that letter is one of the oldest pieces of personal data a human being can carry. Older than your surname. Older than the country you were born in. Older, as you're about to find out, than the very idea of a country. To understand why, travel back more than a century. It's 1901. A young doctor in Vienna named Karl Landsteiner is doing something unusual. He's taking blood samples from different people and mixing them drop by drop, watching closely. Here's what he sees. Some blends are smooth, like water finding water. Others clump, they curdle, they fight. Landsteiner doesn't know why, not yet. He only knows that clumping isn't random. It follows a pattern. And that pattern, once he untangled it, let him sort all of human blood into 4 groups. A, B, AB, and O. That discovery earned him a Nobel Prize, though the honor took almost 30 years to arrive. By the time it did, his 4 letters had already begun saving lives on every continent. More importantly, they saved them by the millions. Before Landsteiner, a transfusion was a gamble with a coffin. Doctors moved blood from one person to another and simply prayed. Sometimes the patient woke up stronger. Sometimes they died on the table, and nobody could say why. The killer was hiding in the blood itself. Landsteiner handed medicine the keys to that mystery, and transfusion went from a lottery to a routine miracle. For decades, that's all a blood type was allowed to be. A medical fact, a life-saving tool. By the middle of the 20th century, blood banks were storing typed blood by the millions of units, a scale nobody in 1901 could have imagined. But still, just a tool, nothing more. But science missed something. The same letter that saves lives is also a piece of history. Not the history you find in books. The history written in DNA, cell by cell, generation by generation. History that needs no document to survive. Because here's the question nobody in Landsteiner's era thought to ask. Why do these 4 letters exist at all? Where did they come from? And why does O keep showing up again and again in some of the oldest human populations on Earth? For most of the 20th century, nobody asked. And when scientists finally did, the answer nearly broke their assumptions. Most people assume the blood types have been with us forever. 4 siblings, equally old, born on the same day. That picture is wrong. Genetically, the letter A is the elder. It's the version of the gene shared most widely across the primates, the apes, and monkeys we evolved beside. Type O is the newcomer. It was born when something went wrong inside the A gene. A mutation, a tiny break. And that break produced a version of the gene that no longer does its original job. Here's the wild part. The entire difference between type A and type O, the difference between hundreds of millions of people, can come down to a single letter of genetic code that is simply missing. One letter. Delete one letter from a long sentence, and the sentence doesn't just lose a letter, it stumbles after the gap. Every word that follows shifts out of place. That's what happens in the most common form of type O. One missing letter throws the rest of the code out of order. The cell tries to build its enzyme, and the enzyme comes out broken. No sugar molecule attaches to the surface of the red blood cell. No marker, no flag. A type O cell is a blank slate. Think about that for a second. Roughly 4 out of 10 people on the planet carry this letter, which makes it the most common blood type that exists. Whatever the mutation does, or fails to do, it was not a mistake that died out. It spread, and it kept spreading, until it became the default inheritance of our species. Some scientists suspect that wide reach hints at a hidden advantage built into O, a benefit that never shows up on a lab form. And now the twist that turns this whole story upside down. That blank slate is older than almost anything else you carry. Because of that one missing letter, type O now appears in every kind of population on Earth. But its deepest roots, as you're about to see, point somewhere specific. Somewhere science took more than a century to admit. So how do you date a broken gene? You can't dig it out of the ground like a fossil, and you can't carbon date a mutation. But DNA leaves its own kind of fossil. Small changes pile up around a mutation over thousands of generations, the way sediment builds around a stone. Count those changes in people from every continent, and you can estimate roughly when the original break happened. When researchers did the math, the answer rewrote the timeline. The O deletion isn't just old, it's ancient. It predates the Great Migration out of Africa, the journey that carried human beings to every other continent roughly 60 to 70,000 years ago, but it goes back even further. Scientists sequenced ancient DNA from Neanderthal skeletons found in Spain. They searched for the same missing letter, and they found it. Neanderthals carried type O, too. Let that land. The mutation behind your blood type existed before our lineage split from the Neanderthals, before the word human described two different kinds of people. That puts its age at several 100,000 years, minimum. And if you trace the whole ABO system through the primate family tree, its roots reach back tens of millions of years into the shared ancestry we hold with apes and monkeys. The O deletion itself is younger than that, but it's almost certainly older than our species, and the surprise didn't stop at the Neanderthals. When researchers examined DNA from the Denisovans, a sister lineage known mostly from a single Siberian cave, they found the same blood machinery turning up there too. In other words, the letters A and O were already being passed around between branches of humanity that would later be regarded as different species, long before any of them met a border or carried a name. This isn't a footnote about where people came from. It's a message from before the word people had its modern meaning. Now, you should be skeptical. One gene can mislead. One study can be a fluke. So here's what makes this story stand up. It doesn't rest on a single gene. The same signature shows up independently in completely different parts of the genome. The Y chromosome, mitochondrial DNA, blood systems entirely unrelated to ABO. Different teams, different decades, different tools, and they all keep pointing to the same region of the world. When separate sources of evidence that never talk to each other keep arriving at the same answer, scientists stop calling it a coincidence. They call it a pattern. Here's a checkpoint for you, because this is where the story stops being trivia and starts being personal. If that just hit you the way it hit me, subscribe now before you forget. Not because I'm counting numbers. A story this old deserves an audience that leans in. And share this video with someone who believes their history started on a blank page. We're about to prove them wrong, together. And this pattern is one of the most consistent in all of human genetics. In plain language, here it is. Every population outside Africa, every European, every East Asian, every indigenous American descends from a small group that left the continent within the last 50 to 70,000 years. When a small group splits from a large one, they carry only a fraction of the genetic variety with them. Geneticists call this the founder effect, and it compounds at every step. Into the Middle East, across Central Asia, over the land bridge into the Americas. Each migration carried a thinner slice of what came before. The result? The farther a population's ancestors traveled from Africa, the less genetic diversity that population carries today. It's so reliable that researchers can estimate how deep a group's roots reach, simply by measuring how much variety was lost along the way. The numbers are almost hard to stomach. Two people from different African populations can differ from each other genetically more than a European differs from someone in Japan. Read that sentence twice. The entire genetic distance between a Norwegian and a person in Tokyo can be smaller than the distance between two neighboring populations inside Africa. That's not an accident. It's a fingerprint left by time itself, open. One of those deep African genomes, and you're not looking at a single story. You're looking at the trunk of the whole tree, with branches that died out everywhere else, still alive inside it. Africa has hosted modern humans longer than any place on Earth, long enough for vastly more variety to build up there before any of it ever left. The fossils agree. For most of the 20th century, the oldest known Homo sapiens fossils came from Ethiopia, dated to about 195,000 years. Then came a twist few people knew about. In 1961, miners working in a cave at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco pulled out a skull. Experts filed it away as a fairly recent Neanderthal, maybe 40,000 years old. It sat in that box for more than 50 years. Then, in 2017, a research team went back with modern dating methods and got a result nobody expected. Those bones were roughly 315,000 years old, and the face looking out of that skull was unmistakably modern, with our proportions, even though the skull behind it was longer and more old-fashioned than ours. Our species didn't switch on in one place, at one moment, like a light. We took shape gradually across multiple regions of Africa, over a much longer stretch of time than anyone had assumed. Run the math any way you like, and it lands in the same place. About 80% of our species' entire existence happened inside Africa, before a single group crossed into Asia or Europe. Everything that came afterward, every empire, every border, every era you learned in school, is the shorter chapter. The main story is African, and its pages kept turning for hundreds of thousands of years before they turned anywhere else. And the proof doesn't only live in the past, it walks into the present through living people, through a man who just wanted to know his family. Let's start on the father's side of the tree. Every man alive carries a Y chromosome passed down, almost unchanged, from father to son. Generation after generation. That makes it a nearly perfect thread for tracing the paternal line back through time. Compare Y chromosomes from men all over the world, and you can rebuild the entire paternal family tree of humanity, down to a single meeting point researchers sometimes call Y chromosomal atom, not a literal first man, just the point where every living man's paternal line converges. For years, that point was estimated at around 140,000 years ago. Then, in 2013, one ordinary DNA test blew the number apart. An African-American man named Albert Perry had sent a sample to a genealogy company, the way millions of people do, hoping to learn more about his family. When researchers examined his Y chromosome, it didn't fit anywhere on the known tree. It branched off earlier than every other lineage on record. Their first calculation put that branch point at roughly 338,000 years ago, older at the moment than the fossil evidence for our own species. It sparked a genuine scientific debate, the kind science is supposed to have. Later teams argued for younger figures, and the exact number is still argued over today. That's normal science doing its job. But even the most cautious estimates place Perry's lineage among the oldest human lines ever documented. And here's the detail that turns a statistic into something almost sacred. Because Perry's markers were so unusual, researchers went looking for anyone else who carried something similar. They found it. A small number of men from the Mbio and Bangwa peoples of western Cameroon carry the same lineage. The single oldest documented paternal line in our species wasn't sitting in a museum case. It was alive, inside the blood of men in Central Africa, and inside the blood of a man in the United States, who had no idea what he was carrying when he mailed in a routine kit. Scientists now call his branch AO0, and it remains so rare that finding a new carrier is treated like a small scientific event. Now zoom out from one man to millions. Every time someone spits into a tube and sends it to a company like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA, they're touching the same science, reading the same markers, following the same thread. Most results won't turn up something as extraordinary as Albert Perry's. But the method is identical, and somewhere behind every ancestry report, that ancient African record is quietly doing the talking. The mother's side of the story lands in almost the same place. Mitochondrial DNA passes from mother to child with very little change. It's the maternal mirror of the Y chromosome, and a second independent way to trace our deepest roots. It also carries the same message about depth. Build that tree, and the oldest branch is called haplogroup L0. Today, it's concentrated among southern African populations, especially Khoisan-speaking communities, whose ancestors split off earlier than any other group on the maternal side. And every mitochondrial lineage anywhere else, on Earth, in Europe, in Asia, in the Americas, in the Pacific, nests inside that African tree as a smaller, later branch, every single one. If you're a woman, you're carrying that record right now, handed from mother to mother through every birth and every hardship, unbroken. If you're a man, your mother gave it to you just the same. It runs through every one of us like a quiet river, from the deep past into this exact moment. And that breadth is the point. The L0 lineage is so old that its internal variety is deeper than the total variety found across every lineage outside Africa combined. Now, before we keep going, I want a favor only you can do. Right now, while this feeling is fresh, hit subscribe. Then forward this video to one person in your family. One person. Text it to them, because in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you the most personal thing your blood can reveal. What your ancestors survived to put you here, and I want someone you love to hear that with you. This next part isn't about deep time. It's about survival, the most direct, brutal, beautiful evidence of what your ancestors actually lived through, and it hides in a blood system almost nobody has heard of. The Duffy system. Most people of European and Asian descent carry a small molecule on their red blood cells called the Duffy antigen. Among people of West and Central African descent, about 90 to 95% carry none at all. 0, that's 1, of the sharpest genetic dividing lines on the planet. Nearly universal in African and African-descended populations. Nearly absent everywhere else. That's no coincidence. It's a shield with a story. Malaria. A parasite called Plasmodium vivax needs to grab the Duffy antigen to break into a red blood cell, a key sliding into its lock. No antigen, no lock, no entry. For a long time, scientists believed Duffy-negative people simply couldn't be infected by that strain. Recent research has complicated the picture. Some infections do occur, but the protection is real. And the signature is enormous. Across huge stretches of West and Central Africa, that form of malaria nearly vanished because the people there evolved to remove the exact door the parasite depends on. It's one of the cleanest documented examples of natural selection answering a single disease in the whole human genome, and it's written into the blood of hundreds of millions of people alive right now. Lay a map of Duffy-negative frequency over a historical map of Vivax malaria, and the two maps almost trace each other, dense across West and Central Africa. thinning fast the farther away you move. Researchers didn't have to hunt for this one. It's been hiding in plain sight in a corner of the blood most people have never even heard of. Type O may carry an echo of the same pressure, though an honest telling admits the science here is more mixed. Several studies have found that people with type O develop less severe cases of falciparum malaria, the deadliest form, than people with A, B, or AB, possibly because infected cells clump less easily without the A and B markers. But the effect varies from study to study, from population to population. It's a live area of research, not a settled fact. Saying that out loud is part of treating this story with respect. And Duffy and type O aren't the whole toolkit. There's sickle cell trait, which reshapes red blood cells so the parasite struggles to survive inside them. There's a G6PD deficiency variant with a similar effect. There's hemoglobin C, found mostly in parts of West Africa. Geneticists call these balanced polymorphisms, because each one carries a price. One copy of the sickle cell variant gives real protection against severe malaria. 2 copies bring sickle cell disease. That trade-off, shelter in 1 copy, suffering in 2, is exactly what keeps these genes circulating instead of vanishing or taking over. Stack it all together, and you're looking at an evolutionary arsenal built over an enormous span of time against one of the deadliest threats our species has ever faced. Your blood doesn't only remember where your ancestors lived, it remembers what they had to survive to keep you possible. Now, for the part of this story that has to be named plainly, because it's the reason so many people are hearing it for the first time. The road from that ancient inheritance in Africa to black people living today across the Americas, the Caribbean, and Europe runs through one of the most brutal chapters in human history. Let's be honest about the numbers. Historians estimate that more than 12 million Africans were taken from their homes during the transatlantic slave trade, with some counts putting the figure at 12.5 million. Roughly 10.7 million survived the crossing, which means roughly 1 in 7 of every person taken never made it to the other side of the water. And thanks to decades of patient archival work, we know those departures weren't from some vague blur called Africa. It was never one place. Close to half of all captives, by many estimates, came from West Central Africa, the coast running from present-day Gabon down through the Republic of Congo, and Angola. Large numbers also came from the Bight of Benin, the Bight of Biafra, and the Senegambia region farther north. For people brought to what became the United States, Senegambia and West Central Africa were especially significant sources. And here's the bitter irony. The very regions carrying some of humanity's oldest genetic lineages were also the regions most heavily targeted by that trade. The crossing itself, the Middle Passage, could take 1 to 3 months, packed in conditions designed to strip away every trace of identity before a ship ever reached land. Names were erased, languages were silenced, families were split apart, often deliberately, as a means of control. The paper trail that should have preserved generations of family history was destroyed, falsified, or never written down at all. For countless descendants, there's no document leading back to a specific place, a specific people, a specific ancestor. For a long time, that felt like a door locked forever. That's exactly why it means something when a DNA test can now compare someone's markers against modern reference populations and say, with real confidence, this lineage traces most closely to the Menda people of Sierra Leone, or to communities in present-day Cameroon. That is not a small thing to place in the hands of someone whose family history was deliberately erased 2, 3, 400 years ago. It's a name where there used to be blank space, because something survived every ledger, every bill of sale, every act of violence. The DNA itself, the type O mutation, older than our species, the Duffy null trait, a shield against a disease, that still kills people today. The deepest paternal and maternal lineages ever documented, carried forward without a single break, while every written record of where they began was destroyed. That's why ancestry testing carries such emotional weight for so many African-descended families. Not as a replacement for the history that was taken, as a partial, imperfect, precious way of recovering a thread of it. You may never learn your great-great-grandmother's name or find her village, but the DNA she passed down is still speaking, still traceable, still hers, and now, still yours. So let's put the whole story together because it adds up to something that runs directly against an idea many people absorbed without ever hearing it said out loud. The idea that Africa was humanity's humble starting line, a place other civilizations eventually outgrew and left behind. The genetics say closer to the opposite. The mutation behind type O blood is older than our species. The paternal lineage with the deepest known roots traces to Cameroon. The maternal lineage with the deepest known roots traces to southern Africa. And the single largest reservoir of human genetic diversity on the planet is still Africa, today, right now. None of this means any bloodline is worth more than another. It isn't. Anyone who turns this story into a ranking has missed the point completely. What the evidence actually supports is narrower and honestly more precious. A claim about time and about continuity. This lineage came first. Every other population on Earth is a branch that grew out of it. And if you grew up believing directly, or just through the silence around the subject, that your family's story was a blank page, that the record simply didn't survive, hear this clearly. The record didn't disappear. The tools to read it didn't exist. Your cells have been quietly holding that archive the entire time, waiting for a technology that could finally decode it. That technology exists now, and what it keeps finding, one gene at a time, isn't an absence. It's some of the deepest, most continuous ancestry human genetics has ever documented. So here's my last ask, and I mean it from the heart. If this story moved you, don't let it end with a like and a subscribe, though yes, do that too. Send this video to one person who needed to hear that their history is not a gap, not a void, not a silence. Tell them what you just learned, because some stories are too important to be kept, and some inheritances are too old to be forgotten. Let's make sure this one keeps moving. Next time you see the letter O on a lab form, yours or someone you love's, know what's really behind it. A mutation that was already ancient before our kind had a name. A father line still alive in Cameroon, possibly the oldest ever recorded. A mother line rooted in southern Africa, with every other lineage on Earth branching from it. A shield against malaria, built over hundreds of thousands of years, still protecting people right now. None of it was erased by history, even when the paperwork was. Empires rose and fell, languages changed, borders were redrawn again and again, but the record inside you never broke. It was only waiting to be read. And now, finally, it is. If this changed even a little how you see your own blood or someone else's, then the story did its job. Pass it on. That's how a message written before history existed finally gets delivered.